Hello, everyone. I am so excited and honored to introduce the amazing Jennifer Serravallo. I have known Jennifer Serravallo for the past 10 years since I worked with her at the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. And one thing I can say about her is she is a superhero of reading. One of the greatest gifts that Jen has given teachers is access to her incredible brain and to help us learn how to be better teachers of reading. Jen believes that all children can be powerful, skilled, engaged readers, and that belief shines through everything she does. She is the author of every book you ever needed to have about reading. She's written Conferring with Readers, Teaching Reading in Small Groups, which open up your Amazon page and put that one in your basket right now. The Literacy Teacher's Playbook for both K-2 and 3-5, and just her latest, the Reading Strategies book, is basically everything you ever needed to know about teaching reading in a handy, beautiful, and accessible form. Her session today, Reading Strategies, Purposeful Instruction for Developing Skilled Readers, will probably blow your mind. I know that I'm prepared to learn so much from her because every time she opens her mouth, it's right down a bell. Go ahead and tweet. We hope you do all the things you're learning and questions you're having. Use the hashtag #TheEdCollabGathering15, which you can see on screen. So with no further ado, I want to introduce the amazing, the brilliant, the powerful superhero of reading, Jen Serravallo.
Christy, that is by far the best introduction I've ever gotten. And I'm, from now on, just going to carry you around in my backpack everywhere I go so that you can introduce me like that. Love you. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me for this exciting day of professional development in your pajamas. My talk today is going to be about reading strategies and also what it takes to make a skilled reader. And I think that's something that all of us really care about as teachers of reading, and something that all of us probably want to know how to do. And what I'm going to do today is sort of break down what I consider to be a skilled reader. What are the kind of the elements of a skilled reader? And inside of each of those skills, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about some strategies that I've found to be really helpful, just to sort of give you a sense of what different types of work you could be equipping kids with within each. So let's just start by thinking about what it really takes to make a skilled reader. And just maybe to yourself or to your dog if you have one sitting next to you, or to your husband over on the couch about ready to watch football, or whoever's nearby, maybe just like list out some of the things that you feel like are essential skills when it comes to reading. And I'm going to start with something I talk about a lot. It's one of my favorite things to talk about and one of my favorite things to help kids with. And that is to really help create engaged readers. So the first thing I'm going to think about is that skilled readers read independently, and what that means is that they're reading even when we're not telling them to. They're reading even on vacations and on the weekends. They're reading and they know how to read. They know how to pick their own books. They know how to stay engaged and stay focused and not be distracted by the electronics that are pulling them away. We know research like this often cited study, Anderson, Wilson, and Fielding, that says that the time students spend in independent reading is the best predictor of reading achievement. And partly because of this and some of the very persuasive work that Ellington has done and others, you might say, all right, well, I've got to definitely set aside time for independent reading in school. But what I would say too is that, yes, that's crucial. And in addition, we need to make sure that kids are equipped with ways to read independently at home as well. Ellington, Cunningham, Stanovich, Presley, Taylor, Krashen, tons and tons of people say that students who read independently become better readers, they score higher on achievement tests in all subject areas, and they have a greater content knowledge than those who do not. So what that means is that kids who read a lot do better on science, do better in social studies, do better in math. These findings by a variety of different researchers, you can see on the bottom, show that students need to choose what they read, because the more they choose what they read, their engagement and motivation to read increases. And so, yeah, I think a lot of us have created these conditions in our classrooms where kids have opportunities to choose their own books, where they're able to read for long stretches of independent reading time, and all of that's so, so crucial. But what I've found in my experience, and probably others of you have found this too, is that just setting aside the time for the independent reading doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go perfectly for everybody. I love this relatively new book. I think it's a few years old, No More Independent Reading Without Support by Debbie Miller and Barbara Moss. And one of the things I love about this book is that they make a very convincing case that it's not enough to just set aside time for independent reading. We've got to also make sure that we support them. We support them with goals, we support them with strategies, we support them with conversations that we're going to have with them in conferences and small groups. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the kinds of support we can offer readers. And with this first goal in mind, this goal of being engaged and being an independent reader, I'm going to share with you a few of the different kind of skills within that, what that means to be an engaged reader, and then some of the strategies, borrowing from my new Reading Strategies book, that may help you to help a child who's not yet engaged or independent. So when I think about engagement, what I think about is that kids are going to be able to focus. They're going to be able to maintain concentration. And sure, everyone's mind wanders, but when it wanders, they're going to realize it, and they're going to pull their attention back to their book. I think it also means that kids have stamina. So it means that, if you have a 30-minute reading period, they can read for that whole time. And oftentimes this is something that needs to be taught, something that you need to coach kids into, and then to be able to practice this over time. It also means that they have strategies for choosing books that are going to be a good fit for them in terms of readability, but also in terms of interest, and that they have an identity as a reader, that they think of themselves as a reader, that they're the kind of kid that couldn't imagine going on a vacation or on a plane or on the bus ride to school without a book in hand. So I think that a lot of this is teachable. Like I said, I think that, if kids are not yet doing this, don't fear. There's a way to support kids with some strategies. So here's the first one I'm going to share with you today. So if the overarching goal is engagement, right? Engaged independent readers, then some of the skills that we might work on inside of that are teaching kids the ability to self-monitor, to know when they're focused and when they're losing focus, and to be able to focus. So on the right, you're seeing a visual representation of a strategy I might offer kids. And the strategy language is going to be a series of steps. It's going to go something like this. When you're reading, it's important that you keep your eyes and your mind in the book. You need to notice if your attention starts to shift, and if it does, stop, back up, and reread what you've read so far. If you notice that your attention shifts a lot, then you want to rethink the book you've chosen to read and maybe your environment. All right, so what you might notice is that the strategy I just gave is a series of steps. It's a series of sentences. It's not enough to say to a child, focus. If it was that easy, they probably wouldn't need the strategy in the first place. Instead, I'm going to try to make sure I really break it down step by step by step. So it's going to feel a little wordy. It's going to feel like you have a couple of steps to share. But really, that's important, because if you think about a student who's not yet doing something, they need you to break it down for them. They need you to explain it. They need you to give them a series of steps, almost like a how-to, right? Like you think about maybe a really delicious dish that your grandmother makes. And you can't just go in the kitchen and just whip it up, just someone tell you, make a really delicious marinara sauce. You've got to say to your grandma, can you give me the recipe? Can you break it down for me? Tell me the steps. There's something that, I don't know about your grandmother, but my grandmother would say, I don't know, I put a little bit of this in, a little bit of that, because she's so automatic with it. She's so, she's been making it for years that she almost doesn't need to measure out things anymore. But you ask again, no, please just tell me, like, is it 1 can of this? Is it 2 cans? How many pinches of this? How many, right? So a student who's still practicing a skill needs you to do more than just say to focus, needs you to just do more than just name the skill. They're going to need the support of a strategy. Let's take a look at another one. All right, here's another one. Different readers do best in different settings. So with the goal of engagement and a skill of focus, another thing I might teach children to do is to pick reading spots that are appropriate for them. But even that, pick a reading spot that works for you. It's not quite procedural enough. It's not quite enough of a how-to. So I might say instead, First, think about a time when reading went really well for you. Try to picture your environment, describe it. Then, second, imagine in this classroom what kind of situation you might need, or what kind of conditions you might need, or environment you might need to do your best reading. Right? Maybe I'd offer different kids different spots in the room, like spots that are more quiet. Maybe someone likes to, wear headphones where there's no music coming through, where they can block out the sound. Maybe some people like to lay down or like to be in a cushiony chair, whereas others do best. They're going to fall asleep if they go in a cushiony chair. They need to be in a hard back seat. I'm seeing some tweets of people who have tried this recently, and it's really fun to see kids, reading around the room, engaged, focused on their reading. I tell people all the time, I think about myself, and I usually will read in I have this one really comfortable, like cushiony rocking chair, or also I read in bed. I don't ever just read at my kitchen table. But that's not true for everybody, right? So why would we make every kid in our classroom read in the same plastic chair? Trying to really tap into what's going to be the condition that helps them read the best. So that's the first thing I want to talk about today, is engagement, and the importance of really teaching into focus and stamina, and monitoring their understanding, and trying to keep their mind engaged in the book that they're reading. The second thing I think about when I think about skilled readers is that skilled readers can figure out tricky words. They don't get tripped up when they get to an unfamiliar word in a text. They have some strategies, some ways, some steps, some procedures to be able to figure out those tricky words. So here's the sort of some of the research behind this. Murray Clay talks about the importance of using these different sources of information, meaning, syntax, visual, and how crucial it is that the meaning is the real goal here, that in order to get the meaning from the text, the kids are really working to learn all of the words, being able to read all of the words, and using these different sources at that same time. So we want to think about the strategies we're teaching kids, and it's got to be more than just phonics. It's got to be more than just being able to sound out the word. We want to have a balance of different types of strategies. Presley and Allington in 2015 did a study where they found that isolated phonics skill work without the application in actual books is shown to be of limited effectiveness. And so here again, I still remember the phonics book that I had when I was in elementary school. I think in first grade, it had a plaid cover. And we went through every day, and we did these isolated studies of different words and word features. And I don't think we ever read an actual real book in first grade. I think it was all about the phonics, all about the letters and the sounds the letters make in the words. And so this belief then that we've got to teach kids how to work with words, but then we've also got to teach it to them in the context of real reading. We've got to help them to integrate those different sources of information, thinking about what sounds right, what makes sense, and also what looks right. So let me share with you now some strategies that I rely on. This one, with the goal of print work, the being able to read the print, I think of the skills of monitoring for meaning and then also decoding. And the idea of this strategy is that we want to teach children to slow down and always be thinking, does that make sense? So as they read, we want to slow down. We want to think, did that make sense? And if not, we want to go back and fix it. Right? So strategies, step-by-step how-to, the skill, the goal is a word or two. Here's another one for decoding. If the goal is print work, one skill we could work on for decoding is to cover the ending of the word. Then second, read the whole word. And I would even add there, think about if the word altogether makes sense, the word that you just read. I think I always, when I'm teaching kids print work strategies, that's always also a check for meaning in addition to the work with the word itself. All right, what's next? What else does a skilled reader do? A skilled reader also reads fluently. Rosinski and Kuhn have found that by reading at an appropriate pace with proper phrasing and with intonation, expression, and emphasis on the correct words, a reader both communicates that the text is making sense and makes sense of the reading. Let me talk about that for a second. So I kind of think about that like, it's sort of like a chicken and egg relationship. So there's, the ability to make meaning and the ability to read something with proper expression and phrasing and intonation. And so it's sort of hard to read something fluently if you don't understand what you're reading, because then what you're sort of doing is word calling. And then the opposite's true too. It's hard to understand something if you're reading it really choppy. I don't know if you've ever tried this. Maybe you've demonstrated for your kids what not to sound like when you read. And when I do this, I'll read one word at a time on a page. And I almost always, at the end of a sentence, have no clue of what I just read, because we're not sort of synthesizing or putting together the words on the page. So I think it's when you're working on fluency, it's both appropriate to teach kids strategies to help them to read more smoothly and with more expression and intonation. And I think we also want to make sure that we're not putting kids in texts that are too much of an overreach where they're losing their meaning, because then it's going to become very challenging for them to read with fluency. All right, so let me get back to my PowerPoint and I will show you my first strategy that I have to share with you today. Okay. So the first one, with the goal of fluency, one skill or two skills that this strategy relates to are intonation and expression. And one of the things I teach kids to do is to look at the dialogue tags. Those are the words that tell you how something is said, like she pleaded or she shouted. And make sure that when you're reading it that way, it's almost like stage directions or like directions to the actor in a play, right? We've got to try to make our voice sound like that, whether we're reading out loud or in our head. So here's how it might sound if I said it as a strategy to a student. First, notice what the dialogue tag says. Second, think about how the character might be feeling or how the character might sound. And then third, read the dialogue that way. And that means even if your dialogue tag is at the end, you've still got to really pay attention to how it might sound. Or how about this? I love this one. Some of you who have read Teaching Reading in Small Groups, I first started playing around with this idea when I was writing that book, and there's some of this thinking in that book, and in addition to my new book. The goal of fluency, this could work with either the skills of phrasing and of intonation. And the idea is that you warm up on a book that's easy. So several levels below your independent reading level, you warm up. And the point of this is just to get the feeling of how it sounds to read smoothly and with expression. And then you take out your Just Right book and you try to transfer that same kind of feeling of smoothness, or if you're working on intonation, that same sort of expression. This strategy works surprisingly well. It's kind of cool to see kids do this. It is like exercises, right? You do your stretches and then you can kick your leg higher in dance class. Same idea here is that you're really trying to practice the felt sense of the fluency. And then it's almost like, you know what I love about this? I think it's almost because the kids are their own model, because they feel what it feels like. So see, look, you did it right there. Now let's just go ahead and do it in this book too. And I think it really empowers them, and it not only gets them in the groove of it, but it really helps them feel like, oh, I just did it. I could do it again over here. All right, let's go back to the next category of something we're going to think about is that skilled readers understand what they read, right? Skilled readers are readers who care about getting the meaning, who are thinking while they're reading. And so I actually think comprehension, right, which is what this goal is about, is so big that I broke it down into 7 different subcategories. In fiction, and I'll review these again at the end of the presentation. In fiction, I think about plot and setting, the ability to understand enough to be able to retell, to understand cause and effect, problem and solution, to visualize the setting. Second, underneath literature or fiction text is character. This is the ability to infer, to think about main characters and secondary characters, learn their traits, their feelings, to understand how characters change. The third, underneath literature or fiction, is vocabulary and figurative language. So being able to monitor your own comprehension, know if the word or phrase doesn't really make sense, or it's being used, so there's a phrase that's being used in a figurative way, and then knowing to go back and try to figure it out. And the fourth category is themes and ideas. And I think about lessons and messages. I think about social issues, maybe symbolism at the higher levels. And then in terms of nonfiction, I think about determining main idea or main topic. Second is key details, so understanding the details that match up with the main idea. Vocabulary is important there as well, so that's why there's 7 overlap. And then text features, determining the meaning of a text feature and then connecting that to the main text on the page. So I really think comprehension is too big to have as a goal. I really break it down into those 4 fiction and 4 nonfiction subcategories. So let's take a look at some of the strategies. I'm just going to share a few selected strategies for comprehension overall. Oh, I forgot that I had research. Here's a lot of people talk about this idea of making a mental movie or making a movie in your mind. And the people that talk about this say that it's crucial to being able to achieve that lost in a book feeling. And that's what makes reading enjoyable, that it feels like a movie in your head, that it feels like entertainment, right? That you can really see it and really deeply understand it. Okay, so here's the strategies I promised. The first one I have for the goal of plot and setting with the skill or skills of determining important events and retelling is one that's best suited for a child who's reading a harder book, so probably like 5th grade, 6th grade level books. And this is to make a double plot mountain. So what happens at these higher level books is that the plots get really complicated, and there's often sort of flipping between different characters' perspectives, or they move quickly from place to place. This particular story I have as an example, Joey Pigs Has Swallowed the Key. There's sort of this progression of plot throughout the story that has to do with the main character's life at home and then this life at school, and they sort of parallel one another and they both have a narrative arc. So these kinds of books that are more complicated, this might be a strategy to help kids with that. Or maybe with the goal of character and the skill of inferring, being able to figure out what's not being said here. Maybe teaching kids how to describe characters' feelings. So here I might say, if I'm going to explain it as a strategy, I might say to notice how the character acted or notice what the character said, and then stop to think, how'd my character feel here? And then use a word to describe their feelings. I love this chart because it's adorable. The children in this chart are really adorable, but also because I think a lot of kids might not have the vocabulary to explain feelings, or they may be able to say the word, but they don't really know the feeling. So making a chart like this with your class can really help them to use the proper vocabulary and also to support their inference in the books that they're reading. To support kids with vocabulary, the skills might be monitoring for meaning and inference. On the right, you're seeing a teacher's chart from probably a couple of lessons, but we might say as a strategy that when you're reading, you want to try to preview and find the words that are tricky. Think to yourself, what could it mean? And then you see actually a couple of strategies below. One could be, you could think about how it fits with the title or what's happening. A second strategy could be, you could think about if it's a positive or negative word. Does it have a negative or positive feeling or tone? A third strategy is you could think about what's kind of synonym or phrase might fit into that sentence. So this chart actually has a bunch of strategies that you might use. And by the way, this is a good example if you're building on, or if you're trying to teach into a particular goal for your whole class. This is a nice example of a chart that sort of builds a bunch of different days' lessons with the skill or the goal at the top of the chart. Here's another one. Let's say I'm working with kids in a nonfiction text and I want to help them to understand some text features as a goal. One skill might be to help them to summarize. So here's, you can see on these orange Post-it notes, a series of steps. Step 1, look carefully at the photo or the illustration. Step 2, read the text. And then step 3, write your own caption. And then it takes a little bit of synthesis or summarizing to be able to put all the information together and succinctly write in just a sentence or so what that picture is teaching you. All right, another thing I think that skilled readers do is that they talk to others about their reading. They have opportunities to meet in groups or in pairs, and they're able to articulate their thoughts and share their thinking about their reading. Maria Nichols has a great book called Comprehension Through Collaboration in 2006. She really talks about how book clubs and partnerships play a crucial role in supporting student comprehension and also in making the reading process a social one. So I try to support teachers in the schools I consult with to make sure that we have some Have some partnerships up and going early on. This is something you can get started with right away in the beginning of the school year. I think for those of you who are teachers of little ones, I would expect that your kids probably meet daily, even if it's just for 5 minutes or so, to read together and maybe talk about a favorite part or retell the book or share some reactions they had or laugh together. And then I think the kids in grades 3 and above, you might have your kids meet twice a week or 3 times a week, 5 or 10 minutes each time. At this point in the school year, while you're still getting to know your students, and maybe you're not putting them into permanent partnerships, but maybe you're matching them up with someone who has a similar interest, or maybe just conveniently who else is at their table. And then I usually try to tell people that by October or so, when you feel like you know your kids well enough to know who would be a good partnership, who would function well, you know what level of reading ability they have, so that you can make sure that they can read the same text at the same time, and one child won't be at a disadvantage because the book's too hard. Those permanent partnerships could become, really great relationships that they nurture across the year. And then by mid-year, a lot of teachers in the upper grades like to move into reading clubs or book clubs and allow groups of kids, maybe 4 or 5 kids together, to read a book at the same pace and get together and discuss it. And so all of these, in combination with hopefully a read aloud that has whole class conversations going on, are all going to be opportunities for your kids to talk well about books. But unfortunately, not always is it the case that kids just come in right away knowing how to talk really well about their books. Sometimes they need a little bit of support. What support? Strategies. So let's take a look at some strategies that you might teach kids to support their conversation skill. So one thing that's really crucial for conversations to go well, but the goal of conversation, is to have really good active listening skills. So this is a little bit forced, and it's something that's a temporary scaffold that eventually you want to wean people off of. But the first thing I might have kids do is to listen and then repeat what the person before you said, and then add on. So it's 3 steps. Listen, repeat what the person before you said, and then add on. So one person says something, and then you see some sort of like these prompts in the lower bubble that says, I heard you say, I'm thinking. I'm sure all of you have had this experience where one child in your classroom is talking, and then another child is like raising their hand or like eagerly waiting their turn, and then as soon as it's their turn, they say something that is completely unrelated to what the person before them said. And it's less about that. They're not so much listening as they're just waiting their turn to speak. So this would be a strategy, as a beginning strategy, to help them listen and to really concretely make sure that they can say, this is not an easy thing to do, even just to listen to, 4 sentences out of the second grader's mouth, process it, and say back what you heard in a short, succinct way. That's a challenging task, and I think it helps you to understand why it might be that their conversations are sometimes a bit disjointed. All right, let's look at another one. Another goal underneath the goal of conversation, a skill that we might be working on, is teaching kids to think flexibly or to empathize a little bit. So here's what happens sometimes, especially in, well, I shouldn't say with upper grades. I think it's really in all grades. Kids might say an idea that someone else had never thought before. And what I want to teach kids to do is to kind of try that idea on for size. Say, could I get behind this idea? Could I see some evidence for it? Does it connect in any way to what I was already saying? I'm wondering about this idea. What question can I ask about this idea? Instead of just saying, no, that's not right away. So trying to think flexibly, try on a new idea, and understand where another person in your community is coming from. So to say it to a child in a series of steps, it might sound something like this. I might say, first, listen to what the person before you said. Second, ask yourself, is there any evidence to support this idea? Does it connect in any way to my thinking? Do I have a question about it? And then third, respond in a way that helps you to sound like you've understood their idea. Okay, here's another thing that I think is important. Skilled readers can think on paper. Skilled readers know how to articulate their thoughts about writing. They know in writing, they know how to think about their ideas. This is something probably more appropriate for kids in second grade and higher than for K1. But I do think it's a worthwhile goal. And more, just to be honest, our kids are being judged by how well they can think on paper, how well they can express their thinking and express their ideas. So here's one goal that we might, or underneath the goal of writing about reading, here's one skill or a group of skills that we might think about. If we want to help kids to elaborate, to sort of go beyond just a quick jot on a sticky note and help them to infer and interpret, we could teach them to first take a short jot that you think is worth writing more about. And then second, stick it on the page. And third, use talk prompts like, this makes me think. On the other hand, I agree, I disagree, to try to elaborate and say more. So this might be appropriate for maybe late third grader and up to really elaborate on their thinking and perhaps even in the act of writing, come to new ideas. With the goal of writing about reading and the skills of synthesizing, inferring, interpreting, another idea is to have kids take different characters and draw lines between those characters to describe the ways that they impact each other, or the relationships that they're having, or the idea that the interactions of one have on another. So what you're seeing here is sort of this diagram of different interactions between characters, one to the next. Again, I think this is probably more appropriate for kids in the upper elementary. So all of this to say that when we're thinking about teaching kids strategies, when we're teaching them how-tos, when we're teaching them step-by-step, we want to make sure that we match the strategies we have to student goals. And I'm a fan of having not only class goals of things that we want to accomplish in a month or in a 6 or 5 week period, but also to have strategies that align to what the individual kids in my class need. So what you're seeing on the screen is a partial list of a hierarchy of possible goals. The one thing I left off of this list is emergent reading. I decided not to talk about it in today's talk, but it's something that's included in the Reading Strategies book, all about what happens before kids are actually reading the print and all of the reading work and comprehension work they can be doing. But what you're seeing here on the screen is a hierarchy of the goals that we just went through. Engagement, focus, stamina, attention, choosing just right books, print work, decoding, monitoring for meaning, synthesizing, or using syntax as a source of information, fluency, which is phrasing, intonation, and then you see their comprehension broken up into those subcategories, 4 for fiction, 4 for nonfiction, with vocabulary being the overlap between the two. Then conversation and writing about reading. So I think about this as a hierarchy, not of most important to least important, or more basic to more sophisticated, because I think engagement at the top of the list could be very sophisticated. It could be a complex goal depending on the student. I think about it more as a series of, or sort of a hierarchy of action. So if I notice that there's a child who needs support in more than one of those areas, I'm more likely to start at the top. Right, so if I notice, for example, that a child needs help with engagement, I look over at them during independent reading and they tend to be getting distracted a lot, and also that they're not really thinking about themes and ideas, I'm more likely to support them to get reading before I'm going to support them with the themes and ideas. I'm going to do both eventually, but I think that the engagement is a more pressing concern. Or I'll give you another example. If I have a student who is let's see, not analyzing characters really, just kind of thinking about characters on a superficial level, and also has a lot of miscues, and as they read, they make a lot of mistakes on the print level, and they're not really monitoring their comprehension as they're making those mistakes. I'm more likely to go with print work than I am to go with character. All this said, there are some cases where some of these goals are maybe a symptom of another. For example, if I have a child who's having a really hard time with engagement, it may be because they're not understanding. Or it may be because they're making so many miscues, or they're working so hard at the print level that they're just exhausted and they think it's such a chore. Right? So I have to make sure that, if I'm looking at engagement is its own thing. It's not a symptom of something else. But for the most part, I'll put it back up one more time so everyone can see it. For the most part, this is really the order of events that that I work in. And so again, I may have some class goals, and then I'm going to also have individual goals for every student in my class. And that goal over time is going to break down into skills and then further break down into strategies. So for instance, if I have a goal of helping to support a child reading with fluency, one skill might be to read with proper phrasing, right? Pausing at the right spots but sound right to the ear in the middle of the sentence. One strategy might be to scoop up several words at a time. Another strategy might be to read to the comma and not pause before I get there. But fluency, big umbrella, also has other skills that are part of it. Another skill might be to read with intonation and expression. So I might give the strategies that I showed you today, right? Trying to, no, I don't remember what I showed you. I'll just give you two new. Thinking about how the character's feeling and making your voice match that, or reading the dialogue tag. I did share that one with you. Reading the dialogue tag and then trying to make your voice match the dialogue tag. Right? So it's not really, I don't really want to say that I will think about each reader individually and plan out in a T-chart, you know, what my next 6 weeks are going to look like for them and all the different strategies. I don't really do that, but just as a thought exercise, I want to kind of share my thinking behind how I break down goals into skills and then further broken down into strategies. Right? So let's just make sure before we leave today that we're super comfortable with what a strategy is. I've given you a lot of examples today and I've tucked in little tidbits, but I just want to be super clear that when I talk about a strategy, I don't talk about just single words. I don't talk about just a single phrase. It's usually several sentences, and that's because a strategy is a series of actionable steps, like a recipe, right? Here's how you do it, step by step by step, broken down. It takes the work of a skill, like inferring, something the reader can't yet do automatically, and it breaks it down for the reader. It gives the reader support with it. It's also something that's generalizable, ideally. I say the language in a way that's not specific to just one book. And the reason for that is I want to make sure that the child is applying that strategy that I've taught from book to book to book so that they have lots of experience with it. It's also something that's authentic. It's also something that I would really do myself as a reader. So I say to people all the time, the more that you as a reading teacher read yourself, the better reading teacher you're going to be, because you can draw on your own experiences and your own life as a reader and ask yourself, what do I really do? And here's what's important too. The strategy in and of itself is not the goal. The goal is the goal, right? So eventually, once the child has practiced the strategy several times, hopefully it becomes automatic. Just like my grandmother doesn't even know how much oregano she puts in her marinara sauce. She just knows it. It's automatic, right? So that metacognition required to think through steps or to consult a recipe, or in the kids' case, to consult a chart, it becomes automatic, and they can just do it without really needing to put lots of conscious attention to it. And when we get there, that's how we know that the reader has become skilled, and that's how we know we've accomplished our goal. So just to drive it home, I haven't shown you in print what a strategy looks like. Here's just some comparative examples. On the left, it's not a strategy to just say read smooth, or to say we're going to work on chunky monkey, or to say we're going to synthesize. Instead, if you look on the right, and I'll let you read these on your own, I'm talking about a series of sentences, a series of actionable steps. I also like to think, you know, when I'm coming up with my steps, I try to start each sentence with a verb. So try to scoop, read all the words in one scoop in one breath. Cover, the tricky word, slide your finger, say it, reveal, say, put the whole word together. So you see, it's like action, action, action. I feel like if I force myself to have actions at the beginning of every step, then I'm sure that I'm really giving directions. I'm really giving a procedure. All right, so there on the last screen is my contact information, my website. I have a blog. I don't really keep up with it so much. I blog all over the place, other people's blogs, not so much mine, but I have a blog that I sometimes write on. It's got some interesting posts there now. My Twitter handle is @Serravallo, and all of the strategies and probably about 285 more that I didn't share with you today are in my new book, the Reading Strategies book. The cover is there on the left. It looks like we have about 5 minutes left, which is perfect. I'd love to take a couple of questions. So Pam says, I heard in the library, this book is not my AR level. Teacher says I can't read it. Should the strategy be supported? So what's happening there, I think, is, let me come back on. I'll close out of this. Hold on one second. Okay, so what I think is happening there is that the teacher is trying to make sure that the student has a positive experience with reading. I'm looking at the glass half full. I think that the best intentions when levels are being used is to make sure that kids have a positive experience with reading, that they can handle the print, they're reading with fluency, and they can understand. And that's actually shown in research to be an important thing. That Allington talks about the control of task difficulty. That if the task is too hard, if it's too much of a stretch from what kids are currently doing, then they're going to shut down. They're not going to participate. We're going to have engagement as an issue. So I do think that it's important to make sure that kids are matched to text. Now, in the public library, in the school library, what a lot of schools choose to do is allow kids to take books that are outside of the level that they typically read. These might be books that parents read to them at home. They may be books that are a bit of a stretch, but they're going to read, above and beyond their independent reading time in school or at home. They may be books that they're going to have other peers in their class read, so they'll have some support. I'm not a fan of snatching books out of kids' hands and saying you can't read it, but at the same time, I do really feel like kids need to have positive experiences with reading, and so leveling usually helps me and helps the student to find books that are going to be a good fit for them. So would I tell kids they can't read a book? Probably not, but I would say to them that that book is not going to be this kind of book that's going to allow you to practice your reading strategies or your goal that we're working on in class. So perhaps that's something you could read above and beyond the independent reading minutes in school or the independent reading minutes at home. Thank you for your question, Pam. Carolyn, do we have any others?
Oh, we do have one more, and it was, I kind of lost it, but it was, what are some good strategies to use for active conversations in middle school and high school with students there?
Okay, so for active conversations with middle school and high school students, I think some of the ones I shared today would actually be really helpful, trying to get them just to listen first and to really take in what the other person has said and then talk back to it. And another thing I find, especially with middle schoolers a lot, is that they're very concerned with their peers. I'm stating the obvious here. And so what will happen sometimes in conversations is that someone will say something, and then the person next to them will be like, yep, I agree, same thing, I think the same thing. Because they're so afraid to say something that's not aligned to what their peer just said, especially if it's a particularly popular and socially influential peer. So one of the things I might talk to them about is how to play devil's advocate, maybe to think about what another perspective might be and put it out there with some careful language like, I'm not sure if this is true, but maybe, or has anyone ever thought about this idea? So give them some phrases that help to maybe soften the language a little bit and introduce ideas that are a little bit different than the norm. Or perhaps you even want to teach them, there's another strategy, to set up a debate, to think about two sides of a particular issue that is under discussion. And this could be a debate about a topic that you're studying, like some environmental decision that was just recently made, or it could be something that's from a book, like should the character have made that decision or not, and break them up into two groups and assign them each different perspectives that they have to take on. So there you're taking away the I really believe this, kind of personal connection to that idea, and it's more just about the activity of the debate, and it helps kids to think a little bit more flexibly and to offer out different perspectives. So I hope that helped. Thank you for that question too. All right, it looks like we're at about time. You are welcome, Susan. I'm so happy that you had an opportunity to spend some time with me today in your PJs, and I wish you a wonderful remainder of your Saturday. Thanks so much, everybody.
All right, I just want to bring to you a little reminder about what's coming up next. In our next session, we have a closing keynote address by Christy Mars and Christine Hertz, who are going to talk to you a little bit about a mindset for learning strategies and independent growth. Do stay with us for that, and also think about contributing to our charity by which is called the Book Love Foundation. Please, you can actually Google that, and you can make a small donation towards that. Continue to tweet with us live at hashtag the EdCollab Gathering. And if you've missed any of the sessions today, please do go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/the EdCollab, and follow us there to view all of those sessions that you did miss. Thank you to Jen, and thank you for joining us.